Saving a life can be a thankless job, especially when you're helping an animal which can't express itself with words. But who would have lived to see the day that a squirrel thanked the woman who saved its life? Sheila Maddie of Massachusetts wouldn't have believed it until it happened to her. Maddie's maternal instincts kicked in when she found the fuzzy-tailed squirrel suffering from an injured paw. She healed and rehabbed the critter, and thought that was the end of the story. But they pair had bonded more tightly than Maddie could have known.
Before we begin, make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell for more amazing videos.
No one seems to have a definitive answer to this question, and yet, any pet owner would tell you that animals are capable of expressing happiness, sadness, fear, and anger. But can they express gratitude? It would be extremely arrogant of humans to assume that they're the only ones capable of expressing emotions. So, when a dog wags its tail or a cat purr, it may very well be expression joy. But how can they be entirely sure? Animals have all sorts of ways of getting into trouble, especially when they're in the wild. But before we talk about how one Massachusetts squirrel thanked the woman who saved his life, let's talk about how 5 squirrels ended up proving that animals are capable of being grateful just as humans. 5 juvenile gray squirrel siblings got their tails all tangled up in the nesting material their mother used. They were stuck with each other, and they couldn't break free. Once the squirrels were brought into the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center at the Wisconsin Humane Society, vets anesthetized the squirrels and began to delicately separate them, which wasn't easy. Once they were untangled, the vets worked on treating the tissue damage to each of their tails. Fortunately, with some medical attention, the squirrels had a shot at a second chance. We're happy to report that all 5 squirrels are now very active and vigorous, happily eating all that we've offered, including nuts, seeds, and fruit, the center wrote on their Facebook page. But not everyone gets the benefit of veterinary care. There are some animals out there who have to fend for themselves against natural hunters as well as unkind humans. In a few cases, help will likely never arrive for these unfortunately injured creatures. So, we go back to the age-old debate: do animals feel the same emotions that we do? Can they experience fear when they're in trouble? They likely do, and when that happens, they look to humans for help. In August 2018, Sheila Maddie received a surprising phone call from her friend, who told her that he found 2 baby squirrels, who were quite likely orphaned. Maddie's maternal instinct kicked into full gear. Animals can't rely on their fellow creatures to treat them when they're injured. So, that's where human compassion comes into play. But while an injured animal might lash out with fear, they'll likely change their tune when they feel better. Maddie's friend, Kristen, took one of the squirrels while Maddie kept the other one for herself. But it wasn't doing so well. In fact, it had suffered an injury, and needed some serious TLC. According to her Facebook page, Maddie's been working as a barn hand at Crimson Point Farm in Middleborough, Massachusetts, since April 2016. So, she was more than happy to help the little guy out. He had a broken paw when I got him, couldn't eat with his hands, and he also would walk on his wrist instead of his paw, Maddie shared on her Facebook post. He also needed a cool name too. Maddie named him Crash Bandipoop, after a character that's super popular in video games. That was the easy part. But nursing the squirrel back to his old self was going to take a little more work. In less than no time, Crash was doing amazingly well. Coming to terms that my little man has made an insane amount of progress since I saved him, Maddie wrote on Facebook. Naturally, the two became inseparable. The bond between Maddie and Crash grew stronger with each passing day. It got to the point where the squirrel wouldn't take his eyes off of his foster mom. But he also split his attention with 2 other creatures. Crash adored Maddie, but whenever she needed a break, he had plenty of extra company. He got along great with Maddie's 5-year-old daughter, and their dog, Diesel, who was a Great Pyrenees. He now eats with both hands and can jump to and from almost anywhere, Maddie happily reported on Facebook. The little guy had really won her over, and it was like he was part of the family too. If Maddie hadn't taken him in, Crash might have had to fend for himself. But squirrels need their paws to climb up trees to escape and look for food. He wouldn't have been able to do either of these things with a broken paw. I love him to pieces, and his little personality is like no other, she explained. They had a great time together, but all good things must eventually come to an end, and Maddie knew this. If an animal is capable of feeling emotions, then gratitude is part of the package, especially after someone goes out of their way to get them out of a terrible predicament, like she did. Gotta release him soon, and I've got knots in my stomach thinking about it, she wrote on Facebook. Letting go was the worst feeling in the world. She hoped that she hadn't domesticated the little fellow too much. Maddie eventually released Crash, and didn't see him for an entire week. But she worried that he wasn't prepared for life in the wild and that he'd met an untimely end. Then something shocking happened. Days later, Crash showed up at Maddie's back porch, and she became emotional at the sight of him. The squirrel thanked the woman who saved his life by showing her that he had survived in the wild and that he hadn't forgotten about her. If you enjoyed this story, wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds. When rescuers had the job of bringing together a primate family reunion, they didn't know what to expect. But nothing could have prepared animal keepers for the sight they beheld once the mama orangutan and her newborn baby finally had their sweet reunion. The challenges of being a parent are very real for many species across the world. Orangutans are not unlike humans in many ways, but when this new mom got to hold her baby, you could see the joy on her face. At the Niaru Mentang Orangutan Rescue Center in Borneo, animal rescuers were looking after the adult orangutan, Clara, as well as her adorable newborn baby. The pair had experienced a traumatic experience and their careers were worried. Clara had seen her baby kidnapped shortly after birth, when an aggressive male had pulled them apart in order to assert dominance. Keepers had quickly tried to fix the situation, but the baby needed to be kept separate for its safety. As keepers tried to introduce the baby, named Clarity, back to her mother, they were wary. In circumstances like this, mothers can often reject their young entirely, or end up hurting them out of unfamiliarity. While keepers were wary, they attempted to calmly reintroduce Clarita to her mother. Both had been recovering from a skin rash, but even so, Clara seemed fascinated by the small bundle that was being presented to her. While several keepers were on hand, ready to pull the pair apart if anything went wrong, Clara seemed thrilled to see Clarita. She reached through the bars, trying desperately to get her hands on the child. Instinctively, the keeper tried to keep her at bay, worried that Clara might hurt the baby. Clearly, though, Clara wasn't interested in harming her offspring. She tenderly reached her lips through the bars of the cage, giving Clarity kisses, as she attempted to stroke her fur and hold her as best she could. This all seemed promising, but it wasn't enough to prove that Clara meant the baby no harm. Curiosity is a common primate trait that doesn't always bring compassion, and there was a danger that Clara might only be interested in Clarita as a plaything. It was clear that Clara was interested, but keepers still needed to be careful to make sure she didn't harm the child. They decided to open up the cage to present Clara with her child, but they had to do so as gently and carefully as possible. As soon as she understood that she was going to get to hold Clarita, Clara couldn't wait. She reached over to help the keeper with the lock of the cage, desperate to get her hands on her little baby. Things were looking positive. Orangutans don't typically smile in the same way that humans do, but it's hard not to interpret the look on Clara's face here as pure joy. After a week apart from her baby, she was so very excited to have her child back. But the keepers still needed to be wary, her strength could easily harm the child. The moment Clara had her baby in her arms, it was clear that she meant her absolutely no harm. As Clarita bleated quietly, much like a human newborn, Clara wrapped her in her powerful, hairy arms, with all the tenderness and love that she could muster. Clara was clearly thrilled to have her baby back. The keepers were very pleased. This kind of reunion doesn't always happen in these circumstances. But this was only half the battle, and they still needed to make sure that the pair were truly connected. As Clara cuddled her baby, a very happy keeper explained that she didn't have to worry about more separation. They are never going to take her baby away again, just so long as they can survive the next big hurdle together. As much as Clara might love her baby, there was a danger that Clarita could starve without any milk from her mother. After a week without breast milk, the baby might not understand how to suckle, and her mother might not understand how to provide this nutrition for her child. Again, though, it was clear that Clara and Clarita were having no trouble making up for lost time. As the mother rolled into a protective ball around her child, Clarita beckoned, rooting until she found her way to Clara's nipple. It was time for some food. Before long, Clarita got her first natural drink in a week. The pair were doing great together, and the keepers breathed a sigh of relief at seeing mom and baby falling so naturally into a good feeding practice. As Clara continued to cuddle and kiss her child, it was clear to her keepers that all was well. The pair would get along fine, and they could trust Clara to carefully tend to her newborn's needs. This perfect reunion was all anyone could hope for. It couldn't possibly have gone better. According to one of Clara's nurses, it was one of the best moments of my career to see this. It's really nice. Everyone involved with caring for the mother and baby know that their bond is very special. Clara and Clarita will continue to face challenges and trials. After healing and being cared for, they'll eventually be released back into the wild, where they'll hopefully be able to avoid any other nasty males that might want to tear them apart. At least for now, they have each other, and that's all that matters.